Welcome to the SAMSN Supporters webinar series. My name's Gary. I'm here today with Jill. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're meeting. We're at the SAMSN headquarters here in Sydney, and this is Darug land. I'd like to acknowledge all the elders past, present and emerging, and thank them for caring for the land and the peoples upon it. I'd also like to acknowledge all those people with lived and living experience of child sexual abuse and sexual assault, and thank them for sharing their knowledge and wisdom with us and helping us to improve our services. And that's very much what the webinar series is here today to support.
Hi, I'm Jill. I'm a counsellor at SAMSN and I work with survivors and supporters. I'd just like to give you a bit of an overview of what we're going to talk about today in the supporters webinar. So this is the first of a series of 4 webinars. Here today we're going to be introducing what we know about sexual abuse of men, the dynamics, barriers to disclosure and ways to respond. Our next up and coming webinar we'll be talking about the impacts of child sexual abuse on men and ways of managing that, and as a supporter, how you can support the survivor in your life through that. The third webinar will be about relationships, impact of child sexual abuse on relationships. Again, how you can manage that, the challenges, but also the rewards as well. And then finally, we will have a 4th webinar in our series of supporter webinars. And this is where we will be asking for your feedback and your questions, and we will directly then be answering those questions. That webinar will be available in November 2025.
In watching or listening to the webinar, we'd invite you to prioritise your well-being. We are going to be talking about child sexual abuse, and we recognise this is a tough topic and that can be distressing for people at times. So it is a video format. That means that you can pause the video at any time. Do think carefully about where you're going to listen to it, that it's a private enough space for you. Do make sure that you're comfortable, that if you want to take a break, stretch, make sure you've got enough to drink water-wise and look after yourself that way. But also think about taking notes if you want to, so that you work out what's important for you. Some of the material might be applicable to you. Some of it you might think, oh, that's really key, and you note that information, and you might want to come back to things. You can always rewind the video and watch things again. But the priority is that you take care of yourself and you take care of those important people in your community who are important to provide and support your well-being. Okay.
So where we're going to start today is we're going to start with some direct quotes that we have received from a supporter but also a survivor. So I'm just going to share that with you. So this is from a female supporter, and she said, "It never entered my head that this had happened until he told me. I know nothing about sexual abuse of men or what to do."
I suppose in response to that statement, we're going to provide in this first webinar some of the material, what we do now know about sexual abuse of men, but really also to centre the reality is that supporters play such an important part. And one man's quote really kind of brings this home. He says, "I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for my family and friends." So that's what this series is about, but it's also about recognising that there is information that we now know about sexual assault of males, and we're going to share that. I'll probably talk a little bit more in this first half, and then we'll take it from there. In talking about child sexual abuse, we usually start, SAMSN, with some really strong value statements. And one of the things we want to acknowledge is that sexual abuse and sexual assault are criminal offences. It's really important to name this because often even so many survivors and supporters don't realise that what happened to them was a criminal offence. And that's a really key part of working with guys, because we're seeking to address an injustice. But also, so often men struggle with the idea that they're not coping, and it says something about them as failing, and it doesn't acknowledge the fact that it's the reason why they're struggling. It's because something happened to them, and that thing that happened to them was a criminal offence when they were a child. And so that's a really important place for us to start to say that childhood sexual abuse is a criminal offence. We also acknowledge that a child, or state that child is never responsible. though we understand so often they're made to feel responsible. That's something that the person perpetrating the abuse often kind of encourages, so that the child keeps quiet and they carry the secret, and they're able to perpetuate that abuse. So recognize a child is never responsible for what was done to them as a child. The person who is responsible is the person who's perpetrating that sexual violence, and recognizing that person takes full responsibility. They will often try to evade that. We acknowledge that sexual abuse is a betrayal of trust and a misuse of power.
Yeah.
And recognise that that's what's key there is in the sense that people after experiencing abuse now have struggle with trust and struggle with where they're in situations where there's somebody with power over or manipulating them in some way, because it's such a reminder of what happened. And so trust can be a real challenge for many survivors, and something that also supporters can struggle with. We acknowledge that everybody has the right to feel safe and to be supported. Whatever their experience, wherever they come from, if survivors of sexual abuse need to receive appropriate support for them that assists them to get on with their lives. And then also we want to acknowledge that every survivor has the potential to recover, overcome the effects of abuse, but also to thrive and to be leaders for change, with supporters in ensuring that children are safe and all adults receive the support they deserve and need. In talking about sexual abuse of males, recognise that this is something that impacts a large proportion of our community. That we know now that we're talking about 1 in 5, 1 in 6 males. 18.8% of all males will have experienced childhood sexual abuse. We also know that 37.3% of females experience childhood sexual abuse, and also that our non-binary friends experience sexual abuse at a much higher rate, about 1 in 2. These are recent Australian studies. It's the child maltreatment study, and it's worth checking out online if you want to have some more information about that. And recognising that often the abuse isn't a one-off event. It will be more likely be a series of abuse, and one of the things is that in saying those numbers, 1 in 5, 1 in 6, that equates to 2 million Australian men. And we acknowledge the 4 million Australian women as well. And recognise it's not just those men and those women, but recognise all their families experience the impacts of that and struggle with the impacts of that abuse. And so it's an important part to recognise this is a serious public issue. And what happens is that men and their supporters often struggle to talk about what's happened and to address the impacts. And whereas historically, people didn't acknowledge the sexual abuse of males or of females, but really only since the 2000s we've started to talk about this and create a space where we can talk about this and acknowledge if we're talking again about 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 of males. Where before we might have kind of struggled to articulate what is different about the sexual abuse of males, or what some of the things that males experience. What we know is about the abuse of males that, like with females, the majority of people who offend against males are males. About 78 to 80% are males, but males do experience abuse by females at a much higher rate than females. We know that often they're a little bit older than women. They're around the 11, 12, 13 when this abuse occurs, but some men are sexually assaulted at a younger age, when they're in their early 7, 8, 9, 10. We know that males are more likely to be abused outside of the home, that there may be other people around, and also often they might experience some physical injury at the time. And this is kind of important to note because often men feel more able to speak about what's happened to them when they've got an injury or something that shows that they struggled or tried to fight out. Because there's this idea that boys, should always fight, should be able to stop what happens, and often men carry that around in a way which makes it difficult for them to speak about what happened. We know that abuse happens in many, many different places, that it might happen in the home, but it might happen in community. It might happen by a neighbour. Men are more likely to experience abuse from in an institutional setting. And that's often because men are placed in institutions in child protection system much more, historically in the 1980s, 1990s. We know that males, in saying that, males also sometimes are abused around witnesses at a higher rate. But whatever somebody's experience, recognizing how hard it is to speak about that is really an important part of what we're here today, and why we're wanting to kind of break the silence and start making it possible for people to understand more and to talk more. People not speaking about abuse benefits those who perpetrate sexual violence. And so what we're here to do is try and support them and help people understand the dynamics of abuse and how children can be manipulated and harmed in a way that stops them from speaking about it. That's about the grooming behaviour. We recognise that abuse might happen to a child through by another child, by an adolescent, by an adult. Might be an adult who's in a position of responsibility. It might be a family member. And recognise that where historically we used to think that abuse between children, there had to be like a 5-year gap, the other child needs to be 5 years older. We recognise sometimes there's children of a similar age who will harm a child. And that can make it very difficult for people to speak about what's happened to them. We recognise that can happen in a family context, which again has another layer of barrier for guys speaking, because it's talking about something that's happening in the family. We know that those people who do perpetrate abuse, particularly adults, will groom not just the child, but the family members. They'll position the child as, the more isolated the child is, the more likely that person is able to perpetrate the abuse and to manipulate the situation. If the child has a bit of a bad reputation, then people aren't going to listen to them when they're saying something's going on. And so often children do try to tell in many different ways about what's happening. Sometimes abuse is discovered, sometimes it's not. Sometimes children speak up, and sometimes people don't listen to them. But one of the things about it is recognizing that abuse happens in many different ways. And sometimes abuse happens in a one-off event, which is absolutely devastating for a child. And it's important to recognize that sometimes there's not lots of grooming before the event, but there's often a lot of work afterwards to make sure the child keeps a secret and doesn't talk anymore about what's been going on. So the more that they can kind of add weight and shame and sense of responsibility to the young child to carry the secret, the more that the person who perpetrates the abuse is able to benefit from that.
Hi, my name is David. I'm one of the counsellors here at SAMSN. Today we're going to be going through a few questions that Jill and I get from time to time, some common questions that the supporters have asked us. Jill?
So I'm going to ask the first question. So this is directly from a supporter. I think that something happened to my partner, family member in their childhood. Should I ask, and how can I support them?
Yes. So one of the things that we sort of look a lot at is how you could go about that conversation. So, finding an important time, or, and making it a safe space, such as, a confidential space, reassuring that, take it into a private space and just setting up that time to allow the conversation to happen is really important, because some of the guys, this is the first time that they're sort of disclosing or talking about it or being asked these sort of questions. So taking that time to create that space and being mindful about the space is sort of a good way to ask that question, and then obviously being supportive and having those active listening skills and being present in the moment, not distracted. They're all ways that we can help support that conversation.
Thanks. Okay.
And sort of, further to the conversation when the disclosure is happening, some men and partners have disclosed that the child sexual abuse, they won't seek help for it. And how do we support them, Jude? How are some ways we can support our survivors that aren't necessarily wanting to seek help or get
Okay.
support?
Yeah, thanks, David. Look, that can be a really hard situation for both the survivor and the supporter. I think if your loved one has disclosed something like this has happened to them in their childhood, then that's obviously going to have huge impacts. But at the same time, it's really important that as a supporter, you really go at the pace of what the survivor wants to do, and really, accept that maybe in that moment they may not be ready. So to reach out for other support. So the fact that they've disclosed to you is really important. It meant they felt safe enough to do so. So what you can do in that moment is just continue to be there for them, continue to provide the support that you're already doing. If it's possible, if they feel comfortable to do so, maybe finding, as David's already mentioned, a quiet, private space where you can maybe ask, is there a reason why you don't feel comfortable reaching out for support in this moment? Are there some things that maybe we could explore together? Maybe look at other services that may be able to provide some support to you, and encourage them to get help, but also continue to support their decision making around that, and just take it really slowly with them. And reaching out to a service like SAMSN could be a very safe first step for them, but obviously when they're ready to do so. So just walking alongside them and providing that support to them. And I think following on from that, as a supporter, you can sometimes find yourself in a position where your partner, your family member has disclosed the child sexual abuse to you, but they don't want you to share that with anyone else. So that can be a tough space to be. Often we get asked that, what should that supporter do in that moment?
That's a
And how
good
can they look
question.
after themselves? Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. A good question and a common one because, that sort of space is a sacred space. It's a very special space. So, being asked not to share can feel confronting at times and sort of, oh, this is a secret I have to keep, and there's a bit of burden to that. But also understanding the inverse of that, that this survivor has chosen to share that, they've chosen to share this with me. Obviously, this is something that they've built up to. This is a moment that has been coming, that they've obviously dealt with for a very long time. And just sort of building upon that and creating some choice there as well. So how they can continue the conversation, how you can help facilitate that conversation and make it as safe and, easygoing for them. Yeah, and just knowing that they may have just shared it with you and they're asking you not to, but that can be the start of a wider conversation of getting support. Yeah.
Okay.
And sort of following into that, we often hear a lot that the supporters are struggling to cope with this and cope with the disclosure that they've heard.
Yes.
What should they do, Jill?
Yeah. No, again, a very common question. I think what they keep doing what they're doing in relation to supporting their survivor, of course, but I think also making sure that they're looking after themselves, and getting their needs met too. That's really, really important as part of that journey. Depending on how the survivor is coping, and what their strategies are. Everyone's experience, obviously, of course, is different. We're all individuals, but I think continuing to just be aware of what's happening for the supporter in that moment and just saying, okay, what do I need to kind of get my needs met? Thinking about things like boundaries. Are there other supports out there? Like SAMSN, we do provide support for supporters, and maybe tuning into some of those self-care strategies, exercise, mindfulness, connecting with their friends, not necessarily around the sexual abuse aspect, but just getting out there and being out in the community and being around others. All those aspects can be really helpful. But one thing I think also is, as a supporter, often you being in that situation with a survivor, you'll be going, okay, they're really struggling right now. Shouldn't I be putting his needs first? You know, how do you respond to that, David?
Yeah, definitely. You know, it's a consideration, right? You know, this is their sort of secret. This is what they're sort of going through. And being self-care is what you said, you know, being conscious of that and having those self-care elements is an important way that you can address these situations. The boundaries that you mentioned as well, they're really good for yourself as well to know this is something I can take on right now, this is something I can't take on right now. And you know, being in a relationship, being whatever that connection is, that's important as well. And knowing that, and that sometimes has these limits. Sometimes there's the time and place. So his needs definitely are a consideration, but you need to also make sure that you're in a right place to be able to then perform or be able to give the best possible version of support that you can.
Yes.
And take time as well, because this is something that you're both sharing in. This is a new sort of disclosure. This is you know, an emotionally heavy conversation. So taking the time to just slow it down is a really important way of putting your needs and his needs, their needs, at the front of mind. Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, David.
Thank you.
Yeah, and look, and there's some of the more common questions that we do hear from supporters, but we're now going to provide some more information around that with Gary. He's going to come back in and give us a bit more information around disclosure and also how to support the survivor in your life.
So having heard from Jill and David, one of the things where obviously there's now a bit more information, there's a bit more research about what we know about some of the challenges for male survivors in particular in talking about childhood sexual abuse, and recognise that disclosure or discovery, there can be many prompts for people. That sometimes it's about something that comes on in the media and somebody sees or hears something. It might be about their particular experience or similar to their particular experience. It might be that they're talking with a friend or partner and they hear about in the discussion the topic of someone's childhood, or about trauma in childhood, or maybe about a friend disclosing abuse and how best to support them. Maybe a kind of trigger for people starting to speak about it. It might also be about things in people's lives. It might be when you're first meeting a new partner. It might be when people have a child or a partner becomes pregnant, or what is a very strong kind of trigger for guys talking about childhood sexual abuse is when a child they have, or they know a child who turns the age they were when they experienced childhood sexual abuse. And it's really important to acknowledge those struggles or triggers, because then maybe that's something they've told their partner or not told their partner before. Then that sets up a whole load of challenges for the guys whether to speak about this thing or not at that time. We also know it can be at a time when people are feeling particular stress, when they feel they're not coping anymore, when they're struggling with health or addiction difficulties, when a partner's kind of starting to ask questions, and they're trying to work out what to say or not to say to their partner, or even the relationship's under significant stress and people talk about leaving the relationship, or you know, even in an argument at the time, it's trying to understand what's going on and how their partner's responding. So they might be triggers for disclosure. Sometimes men have such lockdown on information that they just will do anything but speak about this thing, and so it's almost like comes to a point where they're in absolute crisis, and it comes to a point where I have to talk about this now or just die. It's just too much for me. I'm feeling quite overwhelmed, and I just feel I have to deal with this now or never. So there's many reasons. There may also be one of the challenging reasons nowadays is the fact of they may hear that police are now investigating the person who offended against them, and they may even receive a call from the police. And then, having never spoken about that before, that's again one of the challenges for these guys, is about finding out about that. So just in thinking about this, what we know is, you know, we can start and ask ourselves the question, is telling a good thing? Well, it's actually, telling can be a good thing if the response is appropriate. It's not just telling in and of itself. Well, it will be, you can unburden yourself, but the thing is, if things don't change or men don't receive the appropriate support, then that can be more challenging for them again. We recognize that telling or speaking about abuse is not a one-off event. It's often a question that sits in guys' minds an awful lot every time they start a new relationship. Do I tell the partner? Do I not tell them about this? If I go to visit a new GP or go to a doctor or go to have some health concern, do I tell them about this? I might have told another doctor before and I don't know whether they're in the notes or not. So then I have to try and work out whether I'm going to tell. So sometimes not speaking about this can be a way of looking after yourself, because historically the responses males or boys received often weren't good. They may have led to them being abused further by other people, or maybe even the person they told about the abuse. We know that for those men who did not speak about the abuse in the 1980s, 1990s, they actually have better mental health outcomes than the boys who tried to tell. And that's because the response those boys received in the 1980s and 1990s were really bad. They might have been punished, might have been told they were the ones who had the problem. So those who kept quiet, sometimes just being uncertain themselves, we know they're sometimes traveling a bit better nowadays because they kept quiet. And it's about finding the right person to tell at the right time. Recognizing that once somebody's told something, how that person responds, not just at the time, but in the coming weeks and months, is important. If they start to distance themselves, or whereas you might have been good mates who went out and then this person never wants to go out with you again, you can start to worry about how what people think about you. So it's really important that the person who does respond responds appropriately. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that might be in that sense. But let's just talk about some of the barriers and the reality that we know around males around speaking about childhood sexual abuse. Very few men, even now, speak about their experiences of childhood sexual abuse. Only a small number have disclosed. We know of those that participated in that research. All those males experienced abuse. 6 out of 10 had not told anyone about what had happened. That's the first time in that abuse, and these are guys in their 40s, 50s, 60s. We know that for women, it was only 4 out of 10 had not told anyone else. So there's a bit of a gap here. Guys typically take 5-10 years longer than females to speak about the abuse. And when they do speak, they make a very selective disclosure. Where women might have a group of close confidant or friends to support, or they might discuss things with, guys don't have that. And the person that they will typically speak to first will be a partner. Often that's a female partner. And also then they might also disclose to someone else, like a counsellor at a particular time, but they're making a very selective disclosure and very careful disclosure around that. They have a much heavier lockdown on information. To give an example of how few people kind of go forward and go to the police, what we now know is that 85% of females and 99% of males who've experienced childhood sexual abuse have not gone to the police. So it's a very small number of people that we see with those convictions. Obviously, if they do, we want to make sure they're properly supported. But it's recognizing that the majority of people do not speak about childhood sexual abuse. So let's talk about some of those barriers to disclosure, because it's really important to recognize that there are general barriers which both men and women experience, but recognize there's some particular ones that guys are aware of. As children, there may be fear, anxiety, they may be having a sense of responsibility and guilt and shame about what's happening. They may worry not just about what's going to happen to them, but what's going to happen to their family members. The people who perpetrate abuse threaten what will happen to maybe their mother or their brother. And so guys really, really worry about that and may be keeping the secret because of that. They may have struggled to understand what was happening. If this happened, and they were 7 or 8, they didn't have really any understanding. And it's only when they're in their teens, when they get good sex ed at school, they kind of realize what this was and they understand what happened. But even then, it might be that it's stopped now, and so then they think, well, what's the point of talking about this? And so then they don't say anything at that time. So that's a kind of another kind of part of this kind of making sense of what's happening, because not all children recognize this as childhood sexual abuse when they're a child. It may be later on in life that people come to see that, and that's because they don't have the information or the understanding at the time. They may spend a lot of time worrying about what will happen if they do start talking about it. Men kind of have this real responsibility to keep it together, and they might worry that if they open the can of worms, they could become distressed, they might not cope anymore.
And that's something I hear a lot. It is about that opening up the Pandora's box and the fear of not being able to hold it together.
And what's happened is they've kept the lid on this
Yes.
so much, and so they're used to keeping the lid on it. And while they don't speak about it, it means they don't have to worry about how other people are thinking about them. They don't have to worry about other people's responses at all. So they try and do their best to cope and to manage that. And one of the challenges is, even if a partner asks them a direct question, they may say no, because they're worried about what will happen if this gets out. And one of the difficulties with this kind of way of trying to keep containing this is it becomes a bit of a pressure cooker for guys. So you're just trying to screw the lid harder and harder down as you struggle, and this kind of impact your life, and people and supporters are asking questions. So.
And that's a really good point, actually, because from a supporter's perspective, that's a really tough place to be, because if it's your partner, your family member, you're trying to be there for them, you think maybe something is going on, but it's really hard to be in that position. Yeah.
And the worry is that, for the partners, is the fact maybe that they're hiding something. And the reality is they don't know what that thing is. And so, your mind can get running away there. And the guys, often trying to protect the partner from this information. But there's also a thing of nobody wants to really talk about this stuff. Of course, people want to forget about it. And maybe because they've never said the words before, they just, as one guy said to me, how can I put into words what cannot be put into words?
Yes.
And that's a real struggle to how to talk about this. And the reality is they just may not have the language to to talk about trauma. But there are some particular challenges, as well as the idea you need to be a big, strong man. And it says something about you as a guy if this has happened to you, forgetting the fact that they were a child. They were a small person. They didn't have the knowledge and skills that they have now. However, guys will kind of sometimes beat up on themselves. They'll say, look, but I was fast. I was smart, I should have known around this. So it feels very difficult that he thinks people will judge him if he starts talking about this, forgetting that, that he was a child at that time. And that's why seeing a child who's a similar age they were at the time, and recognizing, they don't have the language, they don't have, they're small, When you're 11 or 12, you're only about 40 kilos, And when you sit there, an 85-kilo guy, you forget how small you were.
Difference in strength and
all that.
Yeah.
And the reality is also there's a couple of things that really guys struggle with. One of which is the idea that they may be gay, that people will think that this is says something about them, and what happens is, because of homophobia, they worry that somebody might think that they're not straight, or that they're not a big, strong guy. And so so homophobia really stops guys from talking about sexual abuse. There's worry that they'll be judged. People ask questions around their sexuality. So what's happened is that guys will kind of keep the secret. And for those men who are gay, one of the troubles is they worry about questions that people will ask them as men, like maybe you're gay because of what happened to you. And so that's another struggle for guys. I'm just going to say something kind of quite direct. One of the things is that nobody asks a female who is straight and is married with a male partner whether they're straight because they're male, because they were sexually abused by a male. Nobody would ask that question. We kind of
Yeah.
expect that, you know, it's just normal for men and women to come together like that. But they will ask a male whether he's gay around this. So there's a whole set of questions these guys have to face. And so sometimes it's better not to tell anybody. It's better to keep the secret.
Yeah.
The other thing that really guys struggle with is this idea that if you're sexually abused as a boy, then you're likely to go on to become a perpetrator of abuse. And this really distresses guys.
Yeah.
It's probably the biggest silencer. The reality is that it's not an automatic route towards offending, but it so impacts guys' lives and so stops them from talking about it. Guys who have never ever thought of harming a child, who would do anything to protect children, who love their own children and those of, you know, in the families, the environments they're in, and would do everything to be there for those kids, don't speak about this stuff because they know that there's this thing out there that maybe people will judge them, maybe will think that they're dangerous in some way. But it impacts guys' lives. So I know guys who didn't want to have children, have even had vasectomies, who've refuses to babysit or change a child's nappy, not because they've thought about harming a child, but they're worried that if people found out about this, that this thing could happen. And as we've said before, this thing doesn't just happen. There's some real intentional actions by those people perpetrating. And this is their way. They may have even said to the man, oh, I'm doing this because this was done to me as a child. So that then sets up a whole lot of fear, anxiety in here. And so the guys struggle very much with that. So there's a whole host of reasons. So barriers for guys speaking about abuse. So when somebody does come forward, it's really important that we can provide in 2025 and on the best possible response to them. And I'd just like to say a few kind of key words about that, and you might want to add to that, Jill. The first thing I would say is listen with empathy and compassion. Hear what the man's saying, and take your time to be very, very much present with him. I would say believe him. But it's not just saying you're believing, it's just being there for him and saying things to him like, you know, how can I help you? How can I best support you now? How can I make sure you're linked in and get the support you deserve? So it's not just what we do when we're listening to somebody talk about this stuff, but it's about recognizing that we need to make sure men, now they are disclosing, they have the opportunities and choice to access support. And it's about recognizing that's about choice-based, so we can't force people to go things, but we can gather information which can help them to access things. We're recognizing we need to respect their confidentiality and their privacy, and that's another part of this, about not talking about this without checking in with him about how he feels okay. And the one thing I would say that's kind of a caveat on that, the one thing I'd say about that is if we're worried about his safety or the safety of somebody else, then we do need to actually take action and get support for him and increase that support around him. But generally, we want to respect that privacy and confidentiality and recognize he may want to speak about this in the future and to check in with him. And if it is something he wants to speak about with you, that's good. If it's something he wants to have professional support with, that's also good. But as somebody who's hearing that, we want to invite everybody to prioritize their well-being. Supporters have a right to feel safe and have their own well-being supported. And so that's a really important part, because we don't want either the survivor or the supporter to carry this load alone.
And I'll just add to that, Gary, as a supporter, you know, if your partner, your family member is disclosing, you know, checking in with yourself as well. You know, how am I going right now? What's happening for me at the moment, to really make sure that you're feeling okay in that moment, and taking it really slowly, I would say as well.
And I think, and after hearing that initial information, it's also recognizing, and often survivors will protect people by not giving them lots of details, and that's an okay thing to do. But it's also okay for survivors to say, "Oh, this is too much for me now. Can we come back to this conversation this afternoon?
Definitely.
I need to take a break from this. It's just too heavy for me." That's not closing it down completely. It's giving it the opportunity to do that. It's opportunity to come back and talk
Take a
about that.
pause, sort
Take a
of thing.
pause, yeah.
Yes, yes.
And so it's recognizing, and I would say for supporters to understand that when survivors not wanted to speak about the details, it's not something you want he wants in your head, and you want in your head those details, because that's not what's important here. It's important that the person who's with you now gets the support they need. And lots of details about what happened back then, 10, 15 years ago, and about what the actual details of abuse probably isn't going to help your relationship in the present and him getting on with his life. And it's not your role to be his therapist.
Yeah, that's a
It's
really
not
good
your
point.
role to be that. You're the partner supporter, and to recognize, and what I would say is, going back to that initial quote, the reality is, I've heard from so many men, they wouldn't be here today without the support of their supporters, from their partner, their family, their mother, their father, their brother, their sister, and even for their own children. And it's really what I've heard repeatedly from men, is the fact is they want them to get the support they deserve as well.
Yes.
So it's not just making sure that survivors get professional assistance and support. It's also recognizing that supporters access the support that they deserve in doing in assisting at this time, and recognizing that there's this place, particularly for men, around mutual support. That if they're just always the recipients of support, they can feel quite heavy and feel like they're not coping. But when they're making sure that their supporters and their family members are also getting support, and they like to see them having the support, so that both of them can grow together, and that this is something that it's been so isolating. And so what they talk about is the fact of making sure that everybody is connected and supported in an appropriate way. And so that's the kind of takeaway that I hear always from guys. Just in finishing up the webinar today, we'd like to recognize we've covered some pretty heavy topics, and talked about challenges that people experience, and both survivors and supporters, and encourage you to looking after yourself, having listened to this, to think about when you're stepping away from the webinar, maybe re-engaging with your world, doing something that's really good for you and prioritizes your well-being and your self-care. It might be like stepping away, going for a walk outside. It might be making down some notes for you so that you've finished for the day, and maybe recognizing that you can come back to this material at any time it is available to you, so you don't need to hold it in your head. Just for you to be aware, on the SAMSN website, there's some specific information for survivors, specific information for supporters, and there's a whole wellbeing section that talks about how you might look after yourself and what we know is good for everybody's well-being. And some of those activities will be things that you might be able to do with the survivor in your life, and to prioritize that. Some of that material also discusses disclosure, and all of the information that was here we discussed here today is very much available on the SAMSN website. So please prioritize your well-being, take a good deep breath and look after yourself, and thank you for being here today. Over to you, Jill.
Thank you, Gary. And I'd just like to add that SAMSN do provide counselling for supporters as a specific support for you. So if that's something you would be interested in, then please contact SAMSN, and the details about that will be on at the end of the webinar. I'd like to thank you for coming to our webinar today, and let you know that we will be having our second webinar addressing impacts of child sexual abuse and ways of managing that, and like to invite you to attend that as well. So thank you very much.